You're with the Sound of Ideas from Ideastream Public Media. I'm Glenn Forbes, and today for Jenny Hamill. Thanks so much for being with us this hour. Cleveland still behind in job recovery since the pandemic by almost 16,000 jobs, or about 1.4% behind its total in February of 2020. It's the largest gap in the state. That's according to a new report from Policy Matters Ohio. Akron has also lost about 2,400 jobs. Columbus saw the largest growth. We've seen that before, adding more than 33,000 jobs, or a growth of about 3% since 2020. The report analyzed 2023 data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It also found that 4 of the most common jobs in Ohio paid median wages so low that those employees with a family of 3 or more qualified for federal food aid. These jobs include fast food workers and retail salespersons. There were some bright spots in the report. For instance, 8 of the 10 most common jobs saw median wage increases, including laborers and registered nurses. Joining us now to talk about the state of Ohio's job market is the senior researcher behind that report, Michael Shields, economist with Policy Matters Ohio. Michael, thanks so much for coming in, and good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to join the conversation, call 866-578-0903. That's 866-578-0903. You can email us, soi@ideastream.org, or tweet us. We're at Sound of Ideas. Michael, first, how do you approach the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and what does looking at the top 10 most common jobs tell us about, the overall state of the job market?
Sure. So we're looking at the 10 most common jobs in Ohio for this report. And then we also have data for all of the metro areas. We've got 11 of those in Ohio, so we're able to zero in on those as well. We try to get this report out every year on May Day, International Workers' Day, and sometimes the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts the data out soon enough that we can do that. This year they did. So we look at the 10 most common jobs in the state. And those comprise about 1 in every 5 jobs, about 22% statewide. It varies around that same number for each of the MSAs. And as you say, we have found that the 4 of those 10 most common jobs are paying a wage that's so low that a working person supporting a small family of 3 would qualify for food aid. Those are wages less than about $32,300 a year, and very likely would need food aid just in order to cover the basics. So that's a whole lot of folks. Just those 4 jobs, it's about 476,000 workers statewide. So while we have seen some growth in most of these jobs, and we've also seen median incomes rise, it's still a concern that we have so many of our biggest occupations where so many Ohioans are working paying so low.
Is there anything that the data doesn't tell us? Are there any gaps there, or anything that you're like, I wish we had more information on that?
Well, we'd have a more detailed analysis if we looked at every job, for instance. This is something that we like to take a quick look and get the information out, quickly. It is pretty representative. When we look at median wages, they've risen just a little bit as well, just over $22 for 2023. I will note this year was the first year that we have data available. They compile 3 years together that don't include 2020, when we had a lot of really unusual stuff going on in our job market. We had lost more than 800,000 jobs just in a single month after Governor DeWine issued his stay-at-home order to protect public health between March and April of 2020. So we now have data that it's actually quite good to be able to see what the job market is looking like after the disruption that was caused by COVID-19, and now that I think we're finished with the recovery and sort of in a new normal. We've gotten our jobs back statewide. The location of those jobs has changed a little bit. Not every region has recovered all of its jobs. Cleveland is still missing more than 15,000. Only 11 of the metro regions across the state have gotten their jobs back entirely. And the makeup of the jobs has changed a little bit. We've had some. So one of the reasons that we've had growth in wages is we've actually seen some wage growth within occupations themselves, most of them. But we've also seen some better paying jobs displace some of the lower paying jobs that used to be in this group. We used to do this report years back, and it would be 6 of these 10 most common jobs. And in some MSAs, it would be 7. So we're seeing some improvement here, both because we've seen wage growth and because we're seeing some industries and occupations grow that are a bit better paying. Some of the lower paying jobs have not fully recovered and are no longer in that top 10.
Michael, I want to talk a little bit about population, gains and losses, and it almost seems is it like a chicken and the egg thing, right? Are the jobs following the population, or does the population gains and losses, follow those jobs? We've seen a lot of population growth in Columbus. They've also been kind of, annexing land around them for the last 20, 25 years or so. But what does that population growth and loss tell us, about the jobs, and which follows which, or does it go both ways?
Well, I could answer that question in a longer-term context. I don't know definitely within the scope of these data. I've looked previously at, for instance, Ohio has lost half of its manufacturing jobs, peak manufacturing jobs, and this is going all the way back to the 1970s. Ohio right now, although we're still one of the leading manufacturing states in the nation, we've got a little less than 700,000 manufacturing jobs. At our peak, we had 1.4 million manufacturing jobs. And with the loss of those, and I say this is sort of looking back over a longer-term trend, you kind of have to look at it that way when you're looking at population movement. That also coincided with depopulation of all of our major cities, with the exception of Columbus. I think it's very clear that is a story about deindustrialization in a state and in cities that were built on manufacturing. Ohio was a destination for people who moved from Appalachia, people who moved from the children of formerly enslaved peoples, sharecroppers in the Great Migration came to our state for opportunities. Ohio cities were a place where they could find them, and our manufacturing sector had a tremendous amount to do with that. We are seeing our cities shrink over the long term, and I think that has a lot to do with that. It's loss of manufacturing jobs, not only from our state, in some cases, to other states, in some cases being offshored, but we also see, and I think this is, I think we have to be really thoughtful about the way that we do workforce and economic development. A lot of times, even within the region, manufacturing opportunities are moving away from our city centers and into the suburbs because they're offered big incentives. So that's something to be mindful of, too.
Kind of on that other end of the spectrum, we're still seeing in the news pretty much every day restaurants are closing. And we've heard for the last 4 years they're having trouble staffing, these restaurants and some of them, very, very popular restaurants. So when we think about the pandemic and how that plays into the job loss, I mean, is that kind of an industry that has undergone, I wouldn't call it a correction, but I mean, that's a major event, obviously, that we're still, that industry is still feeling the effects of the pandemic and the labor shortage.
It is. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that the restaurant industry really has a wage problem. Waiters and waitresses in Ohio were paid $13.92 at the median. That's the middle worker last year in 2023. And, that makes that job one of the lowest paying in the state. And at the same time, compared with 2019, before the pandemic and recession, we are still down nearly 12,000 waiters and waitresses in our state, folks who have left that occupation and industry and never come back. I think a lot of that has to do with wages. We've recovered in total all of our jobs. Not every community has recovered all of our jobs, but statewide we have. Many industries have fully recovered, and we're seeing a lot of folks, seeing better paying opportunities and opting into those.
On that topic, I wanted to mention that there's an effort, a potential constitutional amendment to increase that minimum wage to $15 an hour. There's a state house bill to try to kind of head off that ballot issue that makes the distinction of tipped workers. Tipped workers would not be eligible for that $15 an hour under the proposal now going through the state house. Just kind of your thoughts and your analysis on both of those proposals.
Sure. I actually have a report that came out last month about the minimum wage ballot initiative. The legislation has been proposed more recently than that. But I will say this, everyone who works deserves to be paid a wage that recognizes the value of their work and meets the cost of living. One of the things that we learned during COVID and the recession was just how much we really depend on the work of some of the lowest paid workers in our state. Home health aides are on our top 10 list. These are folks who are making so little that they would qualify and likely need food aid to cover basic needs. So when I looked at this question for the ballot measure, I found that nearly 1 million Ohioans would benefit from that raise. That includes a little less than 500,000 folks who are paid less than $15 today. Of course, we're accounting for inflation. And about another 500,000 who are paid a little bit more than that, up to about $17. And these are folks that we expect would also likely get a raise as employers are adjusting pay scales. They want to retain more experienced workers, or maybe they want to recruit workers who have some more experience on the job. So those workers oftentimes will get a raise as well. The measure would also make our labor market more equitable, more fair. 3 in 5 of the folks who would benefit from this are women. Workers of all races would benefit. People of color who are more likely to be marginalized within our labor market, we're still dealing with structural racism, are about twice as likely to benefit. 17% of white workers would get a raise under this measure. That number is 30% for their black counterparts. So this would have really widespread benefits. I support measures, and my organization, Policy Matters Ohio, supports all efforts to raise wages. We know that wages have been held down for workers in the middle over the last several decades. In fact, they've been pushed down even lower for workers at the bottom of the pay scale. So I do a report every Labor Day. My most recent one found that over the last 4.5 decades, since 1979, workers in Ohio, productivity has increased 76%. So on average, workers are making about 3/4 more than their counterparts did back in 1979. Wages for the middle worker over that same time span grew only 4%. It means that workers' wages are not reflecting the value that they're creating at work. And it also means that, simply going to work, doing a good job, Ohio workers are more productive today and they're more educated today than ever before in history. Wages have barely moved. So we know that this is a policy problem. And I can speak a little bit to the differences between the ballot measure and the legislation. Both of these are good measures. We are overdue, I think, for a $15 minimum wage in Ohio. I'm encouraged that the state legislature seems to be catching up with what voters, I think, have known for a long time, which is that folks need and deserve a wage that really dignifies the work that they're doing and meets the basic cost of living. The constitutional amendment, the ballot measure is a bit more far-reaching in that, one, it's a constitutional amendment. It means that it has the protection of Ohio's Constitution. And that's important because it means that legislators can't go back and modify it later. This happened in Michigan. Legislators adopted ballot language that voters had collected enough signatures to put on the ballot, and then they later watered down the protections under that. There's a court challenge being fought out in Michigan about that right now. But I do think that voters have cause to be skeptical about the intent of this legislature, knowing that this is the same legislature that tried to raise the bar on passing a citizens ballot measure this August with issue 1, tried to raise it to a 60% threshold for voters to pass a constitutional amendment. So the ballot measure is stronger in that respect. It has stronger protection. It would take effect 2 years sooner. That's important, one, because low-wage workers in Ohio need a raise now. Wages have been too low for a long time. And because of inflation, it means that measure will be worth more by about 60 cents to $1 once it takes effect. The legislation would never catch up. And the ballot measure covers workers who are excluded under the legislation.
Michael Shields is the senior researcher with an economist and the senior researcher with Policy Matters Ohio. The latest report out finding that Cleveland is still lagging a bit behind in job recovery since the pandemic by almost 16,000 jobs. But as we mentioned, there were certainly some bright spots and maybe some good news on the horizon, as we mentioned, both with that constitutional amendment and with the potential bill going through the State House that would head that off. Michael Shields, thank you so much for joining us here on The Sound of Ideas. We appreciate it.
Thank you.